So what do you need to know in the fast-changing market? And Pinja, now moving on to the actual topic. What is Woolman? Woolman is one of the largest Shopify Plus partners on the planet. We are Europe's largest partner, and we are serving our customers globally. We have helped more than 380 brands worldwide, and we were appointed as Innovator of the Year by Shopify last year with our data service called Ellis. We have also released some new features, such as a new high-converting premium Shopify theme called Taiga that is now available for every single Shopify merchant. And there you see a selected list of our customers. Moving on to the actual guest of today. So Brad Redding from Elevar, very welcome. You're the CEO and founder. Would you kindly introduce yourself to all of your listeners?
Yeah, great to see everyone, meet everyone. I see some familiar names and faces. Like Mikko said, I'm Brad Redding, founder and CEO of Elevar. We help Shopify brands collect and send data server-side to analytics and marketing destinations. So I live in data.
Lovely. My name is Mikko Rekola. I'm a chief evangelist here at Woolman. I've been working in e-commerce roughly 15 years, and I've helped 200 plus D2C brands on Shopify past 5 years. Moving on to the actual topic of the day. So what do we cover together with you? We will talk about the analytics setup with multiple Shopify Plus stores. This is some feedback we have received already from you in advance, that how do you set up analytics when you are running with multiple entities? And what about the fresh new topic, especially for European brands? What about Shopify Markets? What should you know? Then we will shortly discuss about GDPR, cookie pop-ups, and the experiences Brad has with this. Then we'll deep dive to Google Analytics 4. What's the difference between Shopify's native solution, and what's the difference between Elevar? And then finally, we'll definitely talk about server-side tracking, as that seems to be the hot potato right now. And then by the end of this session, we will answer as many questions as we only can. So my last reminder to all of you, if you want to have if you have something to ask, please use the chat window on the right side. Send out questions. We try to answer as many as possible with Brad by the end of this session. And then moving to the first topic of today. So in this kind of an environment where things keep evolving, how should you set up analytics as a store owner, as a brand owner? And what about these topics such as GDPR, GA4, server-side tracking, cookie consent challenges, first-party data strategies, and data privacy? Brad, you're the expert here. What could you tell the listeners regarding all of these topics? Is this super confusing to just few, or am I not alone here?
No, you are not alone. It is confusing, changing, and it seems to be evolving on a day-to-day basis. The first thing, the images you're looking at here, in 4 months, you will no longer see those, since that's our universal analytics, and obviously that's been a pretty big, or will continue to be a pretty big transition and learning lesson for all of us these next 12 months, really. When it comes to Shopify Markets and just analytics in general, typically there's five to six major points that we end up being involved in. And again, we're just thinking about data collection and tracking from the Elevar side. And it comes into number one, funnel performance. So before Shopify Markets really rolled out, the most common theme was if you had 15 different markets that you were selling in, then you had 15 unique, quote unquote, Shopify stores. So you had 15 backends, and obviously plenty of different headaches that may cause. But when it comes to tracking, one of the first questions that we would work through with many of our customers over the last years is, how do they need to visualize this data? Do they need a quote unquote roll-up property? So if let's just talk universal analytics, that's probably the easiest example that we're all familiar with. Do you just have one property ID that you're sending all traffic to? So it doesn't matter if it's German, France, US, UK, etc. are using the same analytics property ID and just sending all the traffic there, and then trying to slice and dice through filters using host names. You can create different segments, which again, when you are different URLs where depending on what locale the shopper is coming through, you can easily create those funnels and visualizations. Now, when it comes to a unified checkout where they could shoppers will still be coming through potentially different subdomains or subfolders depending on what your new domain structure, but everyone's funneling through the same Shopify checkout where you don't have the different URL or different host name, etc. That's where that's really the first tip of the iceberg when you're looking at potentially pre-post launch performance is how can I view my performance of a shopper coming in through our French store and then making their way all the way through checkout. What's their conversion rate? How does that differ across other regions? So that's typically, the I would say in general, that is the most, now I don't want to use the word painful, but it can be painful just trying to determine what's the right decision for us as a company. Do we need one roll-up property and try to filter, or do we need two? So do we want a roll-up property and have unique properties? So you actually would run two different analytics accounts, which again is very common. I wouldn't say it's best practice or not the right thing to do. It's this, all of this is very, very specific based on the brand's needs, but that is typically what we would see. It's either one roll-up or a roll-up and then individual properties. So that's the first one. Any thoughts, questions on that one, Mikko?
No, I think that's pretty clear. What about then GA4, Google Analytics 4? We'll do a deep dive soon, but what kind of feedback have you received? Is it now time to move to GA4? Should you wait? What should you eventually do?
Well, to be honest with you, the amount of feedback on GA4 has been pretty minimal because not many have really started to migrate and use GA4 on a regular basis. And I even hesitate to recommend people start using GA4 today versus Universal Analytics, primarily because GA4 is still changing. Just 2 days ago, Google released a new feature, which was you can now customize the default channel groupings or create your own channel grouping. Honestly, that was one of the biggest pain points when anyone would go into their GA4 property and just try to look at, okay, what's my campaign performance breakdown? And the question would be, well, how can I change the channel groupings? So it's still evolving. It's still changing when it comes to Shopify Markets in GA4. GA4 is very different. You can't set it up in the same way that we're all used to with Universal Analytics of having one property and then you can create filters, and the filtering and segmenting is very, very different in GA4. That's a mouthful. GA4 360 is where that does open up a little bit more potential for having that segmented roll up and funneling down properties. But again, there's a lot of nuance there. I do, before I go into the weeds on GA4, I do want to go back to a couple specifics when it comes to Shopify Markets and what we see in just tracking implementations. Is it okay if I go back to that?
Please.
Okay. So yeah, analytics, single property or multiple properties. So that's one thing to think through. You can, even though you do have users funneling through the same checkout, if you are on Shopify Markets, there is a way to filter that out client side. So if you are still sending data client side through the checkout, you can, without getting too much in the technical weeds here, you can start to set cookies. Don't think about like the cookies are a dead concept, but just set a cookie of where the user came in, and you can leverage that in the hits that you're sending to analytics. So if you again want to try to stitch together that landing page to conversion across different geolocations through the single checkout, you can still do that. Even if you have a server-side property running, collecting your primary data like purchase data, checkout data, et cetera, for your 100% or close to that conversion accuracy, you can still supplement by adding in this additional tracking, whether it's analytics or another tool. So it's not like you don't have the ability to do that anymore. So you can do that. When it comes to Shopify Markets and the other things that we see as questions and deliberations during the transition for many of the brands we work with is, let's just talk Facebook and Google Ads. Are you using the same property, so the same pixel ID across every location, or are you starting to filter that out, where you'd have different pixel IDs, different business managers, ad manager accounts, etc.? Same thing with Google Ads. Do you have different Google Ads accounts? Do you have to have different catalogs? So if you have a different catalog per region, then how do you make sure that if someone's viewing a product page, whether it's the UK or the German product page, how do you ensure that the product ID that we're sending to Google Ads, the signal that we're sending to Google Ads, matches the specific product catalog for that region? So that is another nuance. Again, if you are going through this process of either spinning up international stores, or you already have them, maybe you've gone through this, or migrating to Shopify Markets, this is something that you would want to think about, because in general, what we're seeing today with Shopify Markets, just the data that Shopify is exposing is pretty solid. So you do have the ability to, if I'm looking at, I have a couple screens pulled up in case I needed to show them, but a Canadian product through checkout versus a US versus a French funnel, that you have the currency code, you have the different product IDs if needed, etc. So that's number 2 and 3. Again, different pixel IDs or account IDs. Do those need to be different all the way through the checkout process? And then the third point was the catalog. So do you have different catalogs, which we do see that fairly often, where you'd have distinct catalogs per region. And again, that you just need to make sure that your data that you're sending for remarketing data collection matches. I already mentioned this one, so just to try to wrap up on the Shopify Markets aspect, but just ensuring that if we just talk data collection and tags, that you are using variables to collect currency code and value differences and product data differences, because again, depending on the currency changes, if you have currency conversions that are drastically different, and let's say you are sending a different currency code, but you are not sending it the distinct value, that's where we've seen that cause issues in Facebook, where all of a sudden we're sending the value has been translated where it's 50,000 quote unquote dollars, but the currency code was not adjusted. So that can cause some algorithms to go haywire. So just making sure any of the tags, you are using those variables that Shopify exposes, so you are sending the proper currency code with the value, so you don't cause those discrepancies in different platforms. And then the last one here when it comes to Shopify Markets, and this really touches GA4 and everything else that's going on today with tracking, is I'm calling it the old checkout versus the checkout extensibility. So we have checkout extensibility that's rolling out in different stages, and there's a future stage that has not fully rolled out yet, and that is how to handle the order status page and the post-purchase tracking. So that is another nuance to consider. So if you have gone through the process of ensuring all of your tracking is set up the way that it's working for your brand and company in the quote-unquote old checkout, it won't just be a flip the switch and everything works on the new checkout extensibility. There will be adjustments and changes that need to be made, just so you don't end up, again, breaking some of the hard work that you put in place. And the last point, actually, I'll pause there just to see if, Mikko, if you wanted to poke and prod on any of those topics any further.
I think those were like excellent points, Brad, and that's actually a topic that we have been raising up, what has lately happened with the checkout and what still will. So please continue.
Okay. I think I'll wrap that up there for Shopify Markets, and won't go too deep into checkout extensibility on this webinar, unless you want to dive into that.
Great. I think that we can move on the next slide. Let's discuss these topics like one by one. So definitely the one that has been a very, very hot potato among our European customers is like GDPR and cookie consent pop-ups. That in the EU, cookie consent pop-ups have become mandatory, and every single country is sort of like making slightly their own adjustments to the law and giving sort of like recommendations how you should do it. But overall, it means that you would need to have on an EU site this kind of a pop-up where you use consent for cookies. Is it allowed for the user to be followed or not? And that this pop-up needs to be something that automatically comes when you first time visit the store, and that you shouldn't be anymore able to spend time on the store and just ignore this, but you would need to reply something. So Brad, how to make sure that you are doing this right in terms of analytics? And what have you seen with your customers in terms of cookie consent pop-ups, whether it's GDPR, UK GDPR, or CCPA?
Yep. Yeah, loaded question. I'm very opinionated on this topic. I think in general, just to maybe get that out of the way, is fully understand the need for compliance and legalities and giving users choices. Like where I have trouble, where my opinion nature comes in with this is, I feel like this is obviously it's very heavy in the States, US as well, where I'm based with, because there's 5 more states that have their own quote unquote CCPA like regulations. But it seems like this compliance is turning into a CRO project. Is how do I turn the consent management turns into a conversion optimization project, which to me it kind of defeats the purpose of what we're doing here. And I don't know. So that's I'll put that aside. And we talked I think it might have been our podcast, Mikko. I talked a little bit about that. But in any case, so what we're seeing with customers, we will do as minimal as possible until we are forced to do it. If I were to summarize in general, if I just look at thousands of different brands that I've come across over the years, that's what I'm generally seeing. I'm not saying I advise that, but it's we'll do it when we have to, a mentality, which is dangerous because we're seeing that enforcement is coming out. And again, just talking in the United States specifically, California is one state where now they have a new agency where now they are going after, and we've started to see lawsuits come out. I know it happens. It's been happening for years across many countries in Europe. So it is dangerous just wait until you get your hand slapped, because the hand slap might be a significant fine depending on the size of the business. So with that, we are seeing, I would say, in the last 6 to 12 months, there has been a more substantial, especially for brands. I would say when they get 20, 30, 40 million annual revenue, there's just more legal involvement in the process of setting up analytics, whether it's before even working together and working through DPAs and things of that nature, or ensuring that all tracking is set up and maintained with proper consent compliance. So when it comes to the general cookie pop-ups, like, hey, I'm going to show you a cookie, just keep doing what you're doing, but I feel like I have to show this. I think we all know that doesn't really make you compliant. So there's that more, the CRO aspect of the GDPR, ensuring that customers have choices. But yeah, it's turning into a little bit of a CRO experiment of how do we get, bump up from 45% to 55% of people that opt in. And then from there, the technical implementation. So this is something that we've been working on for many, many years, and we have consent integrations. We essentially work with any consent provider, since there's hundreds of them at this point. It's ensuring the small things that you may not think about, because you shouldn't have to think about them as a brand owner or operator. Of, okay, if a user clicks accept all, so if they come to the site and the user clicks accept all, or some variation of that on a landing page, how do we ensure that we start initiating that data collection right away versus potentially waiting for another page view? So if someone lands on a product page, and if the way the consent integration is set up, where someone lands on a product page or a landing page and they add to cart, but it doesn't initiate a page refresh, if you don't have it set up properly, then you're not collecting data. And let's say the user bounces or leaves after they add to cart, or their session goes stale, whatever it might be, then you've lost a certain percentage of data that you could have collected that you are not. So that's a very small nuance of a proper GDPR integration, is making sure if someone accepts the consent and then they add to cart, then, or they perform some activity, that the pixels and tags end up triggering. With a big move for many brands going to single page apps or headless sites, this is another nuance of, because when you think about a headless site, a single page app is technically that's a single page. Everything's loaded at once when you load up your primary domain. So that can also cause some nuances or confusion or issues if the consent compliance and how the consent mode triggers are connected to your Facebook pixel or analytics data, of just making sure, again, you don't end up with that gap where people go to 3 or 4 different quote unquote pages, but they since it's a headless or a single page app, that the consent mode was not updated, and again, you end up losing out on that data. So those are some of my initial just overarching thoughts on what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Brad. Those are truly some examples that you should take into consideration, at least very carefully. And just from the practical side, we actually at Woolman have a team who have been helping our customers. Here is actually our service to help our customers, because we have noticed that roughly like half of all D2C brands running on Shopify Plus don't do it the way it's supposed to do. And we even have sort of like a green list and a red list of service providers or app providers who are doing it the right way. It's slightly dangerous that there are currently like providers on Shopify App Store which don't fully qualify as a provider who can really make it happen in a way that it's supposed to, and have messed, as example, with your analytics. And then the second part, which sort of like merchants don't always remember, or if you're running on multiple stores, you might get a bit messy, or you have completely like misunderstood. So Pinja, if we move on the next slide, it's essential also to go through your Shopify settings when making this happen. And there are like few options here, and there's a pretty big difference depending on which box you tick. So the installation itself, it's not just that you install the app, but you should, before that, go through these settings, have the understanding of what you are doing, and also look at analytics, right, Brad? Did I miss anything here?
No, I think those are all good points. I would say you somewhat mentioned it, is ensuring that other apps or functionality that's installed isn't potentially collecting data outside of your GDPR compliance or cookie compliance setup. So that is something that we'll see occasionally as well.
Sure, really good point. And our sort of like recommendation here is that if you don't know exactly what you are doing, please ask for help. We have done this multiple times after the customer itself has done some mistakes here or isn't quite sure what to do. So this is a pretty good way to mess up with your analytics and other things. So we have a process how to make this happen. And if you still decide to do this by yourself, then the basic recommendation is that if you are running multiple entities, so multiple storefronts, as example, for different markets, you need to do this process for every single store. It's not enough that you do it for one store and then you're like happy with it, but you need to follow the guideline for every single store. And then you of course look at in what market that store is. Is it in a EU country? Is it somewhere else? What policies do you take into consideration here? Cool.
You actually reminded me of a good real example. It came up 2 days ago with a new customer of ours. They have 3 sites, US and I can't remember I think UK and one other in Europe. And again, very nuanced, very different requirements, just thinking US and non-US locations. And they had their consent integration, and in the Elevar setup, we integrate with both the data client-side tracking and server-side tracking. And the question was, we're getting 0 purchase conversions in GA4, something must be broken. And in their server log and their Elevar dashboard, we're showing, well, all purchases where their consent mode was not granted. So the consent integration that was implemented in the US store was essentially blocking everything by default, but they weren't showing the prompt to US users to accept all. So essentially we're just blocking everything by default. That actually is a very common use case that we see with multi-store brands, where every store needs to be set up slightly different. So that's another one to consider.
Fully agreed here. Thanks for the example. Then moving on to the next topic from GDPR is sort of like GA4 as itself. So this is a topic that has been discussed online a lot, but I think that we could go this through once more. What are the key benefits for brands when they do the shift for GA4? What are the typical mistakes you've experienced, Brad, with your customers, or what you've seen on the market? And the main question here, what is the core difference between installing GA4 with Elevar instead of using Google's own app that is now on Shopify's App Store? And then please share us your do's and don'ts when setting up the analytics.
The benefits is if you don't do it, then once Universal Analytics is sunset in July, then you won't have the quote unquote free analytics tool. GA4, like I mentioned a little while ago, where the default channel grouping functionality that they added, they're going to continue to add functionality that it's almost like they have to, because there's such an uproar in the community and there's such a low percentage of users that are adopting GA4. And from Google's standpoint, they last year, I think it was in the summer at one of their conferences, they announced the new quote unquote Google tag. So it's I'll use like their segment or their Elevar, where you implement one Google tag and then you can route that data to multiple destinations. So you can send it to GA4, you can send it to multiple Google Ads properties or multiple GA4 properties. And that actually is a benefit to moving to the quote unquote Google. It's their nomenclature they use is really confusing. So if you're even listening to me speaking, wondering what the heck I'm talking about, likely just because I'm confused with some of the nomenclature myself. But with implementing GA4, or aka the Google tag, the Google Ads integration, it is better, in my opinion, than what we've seen with Universal Analytics. So that is one tertiary benefit outside of just analytics, but if you're a heavy Google Ads user, it's a better implementation. Some of the improvements of GA4 versus Universal Analytics, I could talk all day on this, is more flexibility. So it is event driven, again, without getting too much in the weeds on the technical nuances of data collection. You just have more control. You have more control and customization than Universal Analytics. Universal Analytics, yes, you have custom dimensions, which we would see used, but if you tried to stitch that data and use it across hit level versus session level versus user level data, you might see empty reports and wondering what the heck's going on. That problem is, it's not eliminated in GA4, but you do have a little bit more control with event properties and user properties. And once you get that data out, I mean, there is that automatic sync to BigQuery, which we're seeing many brands, small, medium, and large, move to just visualization in their own data warehouses, or other tools like Ellis or Dacity, which is popular here in the States. Because the data storage is cheap, you have access to that raw data, and there's so much tooling that you can set on top of it now to recreate those universal analytics like dashboards and visuals. You just have more control. So things like stitching, if you want to stitch multi-session data together. So if you have guests that came through and you have a unique user ID that's attached to every hit that you're sending to GA4, at some point in the future, let's say a month down the road, if they complete a purchase, then you can start to stitch those journeys together. And again, you wouldn't do this manually. You would do this in your data warehouse, but those are capabilities that you could do in Universal Analytics, but it was a little bit more complicated or difficult. The typical mistakes happening. Oh, sorry. Did you have a comment there?
No worries. No worries. That was great. Yeah, please tell about the mistakes. That's the one that everybody wants to hear.
It's hard to say the mistakes. I mean, it's just because it's such an unknown. Time is our most critical asset, or most limited asset that we all have as just individual beings. So going down the deep, dark hole of GA4 just has been something that none of us have really wanted to do over the last year. So I would say mistakes, the set it and forget it, that's not really it. You can, not to plug Elevar, but since we've been implementing since App Plus Web, there has been that focus of try to make it for our customers. Just set it up. You're not going to use it for a year. Just set it up so it's collecting data, have it in parallel. But what I have seen mistakes where there would be two primary ones if you aren't using Elevar or another platform, is just taking their code, so taking the GA4, their data stream code, and just pasting it in the top of your theme.liquid just to send data there. You're not collecting any ecom data, so it's not really going to do you much good outside of just page views. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two would be doing the automatic linking from Universal Analytics to GA4. That also is not a recommended approach, because again, the data structures are so much different between UA and GA4 that when you actually start to mature into utilizing the GA4 data, you're going to wonder, you're going to say this data is garbage. We need to start over. So that would be another one, is I don't recommend doing that, the automatic linking of UA to GA4 to just do everything for you. The core, obviously the Google Channel app launched their one-click GA4 data collection, which they need, Google and or Shopify, they need to have a simple way that the millions of stores that just want to collect data and they're not going to be extremely sophisticated or worried about nuances that I'll talk about here in a minute. You have to have it so you can you can create a second property and just connect it and compare to what you've implemented yourself or through another third-party tool. The biggest things I would call out here, that again, this is today, it's been live for maybe a week, and they have a beta label, so I would assume some fixes might come in. And this is owned by Google. Google maintains it, not Shopify. So one key call out there. The biggest one to me is post-purchase upsells. Since their GA4 integration is client side, so there's no server side, so you are already going to lose 10 to 30% of data. But if you are using post-purchase upsells, the purchase event does not trigger until a final thank you page. So in that process of an upsell where I purchased my t-shirt, and then you show me, hey, do you want to buy this matching pair of socks or something else? We will trigger, or most of the time, most brands want a purchase to trigger at that point in case the user exit, because not every user is going to take the upsell or decline it. So that's a pretty big gap where I wouldn't be surprised if you end up catching less than 50% of conversions. So if you have post-purchase upsells, be aware of that. Some other reasons that, again, maybe that'll change in the future. Instead of using SKU as the product identifier, which is what the native Shopify UA integrations use forever, it's using the Shopify product ID. So that is the ID that they automatically set and are sending as the quote unquote SKU or ID you see inside of GA4. So that will cause issues if you're trying to stitch pre-post GA4 together. You can't change it. You can't customize it. It has the core events where you'll have the page view and view product, but it's missing many of the events that Elevar uses or other apps send as well, like all of your checkout events, your collection page events, search results page, login. Those events we support, but the native Google channel does not. There's no user ID set, so they're not setting a user ID. So we use the Shopify. Shopify has a 1-year expiry user ID that's hardened against browser or ITP resets, cookie resets. They do not have, so there is not a user ID set, so you wouldn't be able to do that stitching like I mentioned a minute ago. Some other smaller things, but those are probably the biggest call outs. And in terms of the Elevar side, you can choose, so you can do whatever you want essentially. You can choose what product ID you want to send, choose what order identifier you want to send. You can manage post-purchase upsells. It covers all the main 15 core events.
Thanks, Brad. We actually have some of our team members here today who have been installing your solution to I would say, like mid-market to enterprise level customer of ours. But from your perspective, when do you really get benefit out of Elevar? On what scale do you need to be, and at what stage do you really get benefits if you do it more, I would say, sophisticated way to make sure that you track as much as possible?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm the worst salesperson, or in the world, at least for even my own company. But in general, I know we have some customers on here that we've worked with for several years. Our biggest focus is to make tracking, analytics, conversion tracking a superpower for our customers. Not to sound too corny, but historically it's been okay, Facebook or marketing channels. So how can we ensure that our customers are maximizing their return on ad spend or ROI on Facebook, Google Ads, etc.? And that's where we dove really deep years ago into, okay, we need to get the server-side tracking up and running, and it's very similar to that example I was sharing with the Google channel in GA4, where they're just missing 30 to 40% of the features that really makes it fully robust. Very similar to what we were seeing for years with the Facebook Pixel, the native integration is we're not sending, Facebook's not receiving the FBP cookie value, say click ID, but they're not receiving that. They're not receiving all the emails or phone numbers or add to carts or whatever it might be. So if the platforms are missing out on 30 to 40% of the data, or if they're not getting certain attributes, then that inherently is going to make their performance, it's going to be a detriment to their performance. So that's probably, if I just think non-Google Analytics side, that is the biggest value add that we offer, is just getting more money, more return out of your marketing spend, whether you're using Facebook, Google Ads, TikTok, because we're just able to collect and send more data, and that's what they need. They just need more data to operate better and report better and go find new customers.
Thanks, Brad. Really good points. And as a customer of your service, we've definitely seen a major increase, and our customers that are running heavy with PPC have been super happy that you can get better quality data, eventually run much better campaigns, and get more sort of like reliable results. So that's definitely something. Is there anything more you would like to present from Elevar's end, or something you've learned with your customers?
The only thing I would mention, we're pretty much an open book. Part of our core values is, and our own flywheel is sharing everything that we know. So that way, if you want to do it yourself, you can, or if you want to use a service like ours to automate it, we do that as well. So we offer a lot of education. I have a podcast, ironically enough, called the Conversion Tracking Playbook Podcast, to which all I do is essentially share the latest news and tips and what's happening in the world of tracking and GA4. So that's some education. We have other videos and content that, again, our job is to educate. And so if anyone wants to do it on their own, they can. And we're there if and when you need someone to help you through that process.
Lovely. I think that we can move to the last topic of today. Let's talk more about this server-side tracking. So what we have learned with our customers that it's somewhat of a complicated topic to understand, and to understand that is this something that is nice to have? Is this mandatory? Is this something that would help me in the sort of, especially when you're a D2C brand that is heavy with paid acquisitions? And so could you, Brad, kindly explain what this server-side tracking is all about? What can Elevar do here? And what are the actual core benefits of tracking server side?
Yeah. So to try to keep it fairly high level, the benefits of server side tracking, number one, you can be explicit on the data that you are collecting, which is very critical for GDPR or legal compliance that you need to follow. So what I mean by that is client side, where let's say you're spinning up, I don't know, advertising with a new MarTech vendor, and they send you a PDF and it has copy and paste this JavaScript in your theme, or put it in Google Tag Manager and just publish and go. That's implicit. So you don't know the data they're collecting and scraping from the browser. With server-side tracking, it'd be very, very explicit. So it has to be defined. So you can choose what data that you are sending. Second benefit is going to be around just general accuracy. So if we work our way back from purchases, which is the most critical event, if you are implementing server-side tracking and true server-side tracking, so leveraging Shopify webhooks, where you have the Shopify webhook runs, maybe it goes through some middleware like Elevar or Segment or others, and then it's going to Facebook, GA4, TikTok, etc. That's server to server. It's outside the browser. And that's how you end up with your 100% conversion accuracy in different platforms, because it is outside the browser. There is a nuance there where you might ask, well, how can I remain compliant if I'm sending data outside the browser, outside of where OneTrust or my other tracking or consent integrations are? I can't speak for other platforms, but the way that we do it is, Shopify has what's called a Shopify cart or Shopify session. So if somebody when they choose their 4 categories of consent compliance, we attach that to the Shopify cart or the Shopify session. So if there's an order placed that exists as cart attributes or order attributes, so that allows us to read if someone opted out. You configure it in your Elevar server side destination. So if you don't want to send a conversion server side, if someone's opted out, that's how we're able to connect the online versus the offline tracking. One of the other benefits, which we are seeing as we evangelize with other marketing platforms, is site speed. So the move to headless, the big headless move over the last 3 to 4 or 5 years has been site speed, higher conversion rate optimization, or higher conversion rates, etc. But typically we've seen, even in our own and building headless sites years ago, is okay, the site's super fast, and now let's plop on Google Tag Manager and all the scripts that have to run, and all of a sudden your lighthouse score goes from 95 to 65, and then the engineers hate the marketers, like, take all this stuff, take all these scripts out, it's slowing down the site. So with server-side tracking, that ends up being, we are seeing more vendors that open up their quote unquote or build a conversion API. So once we implement, on the Elevar side with Criteo or Impact Radius or ShareSale or others, where normally they're going to give you this lengthy PDF and implement this tracking scripts in your theme or GTM. If you implement server side, you don't need to add that JavaScript to the site. So over, I would say, a year to 2 years from now, you're going to see most vendors, they'll want server side integrations because it's more accurate for them. And the direct benefit to the site is less JavaScript, and that can just, it's not going to take your site speed from 7 seconds to 2 seconds, but those small incremental benefits will improve.
Thanks.
So those are the three. I would say the top 3 benefits to why we're seeing more brands go server side.
Really good points, and that brings me back to my experience in 2017 when we had the first headless store, one of the first headless, like Shopify headless stores in Europe, and I was like, oh man, who turned off the lights when all the analytics broke? And it was like pretty tough to figure that out eventually. And the trend that we have been seeing with quite many of our customers is that actually a move from headless back to Shopify Plus with a good team such as our Taiga, that is blazing fast, but life is definitely more easy if you don't have the great resources to maintain a headless setup. But personally, I'm also a fan of headless if that works and if you can afford it. And that's definitely interesting to see what happens with these headless builds in the very future. Thank you so much, Brad, for your time. Anything else you want to add before looking at the questions?
No, I don't know how many questions are in, but let's jump into there. That way, anybody that post shared, we can jump in and answer those.
Cool. So there is first question from Pinia, and Pinia is stating here that in a nutshell, do I hear correctly that all data setup is much easier when you have multiple Shopify Plus instances compared to Shopify Markets?
Not, is it easier for a multi-store? Honestly, probably. There's some aspects that are easier, but other aspects that make it more complicated. So I know it's kind of a cop-out answer. I think with Shopify Markets, with a single checkout, ultimately that is easier. It is easier. You have one checkout to worry about instead of 15. So I know we have one mutual customer that I think they have 10 or 12 different stores. So just use that as one example. If there's an update that they need to roll out tracking or analytics wise, that update needs to be replicated across 12 stores. If 2 stores are missed for whatever reason, then that can be a pain. So it's generally easier for the funnel tracking visibility that I mentioned, having different store setups, but that comes with other downsides, like I just mentioned, just trying to keep up with everything that you have to keep up with 10 to 12 plus stores.
Thanks, Brad. Then there is a question from Tim Snyder. From my understanding, you can choose collected before consent and then configure consent settings in CMP or Tag Manager, or am I getting this wrong? How do you think? What would be your answer?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. It is nuanced per channel. So Google specifically has that type of setup where again, it's pretty confusing, but you can collect without sending and just trust that they're not going to do anything with it. But you don't have that power with a Facebook or other non-Google channels that it's like a light switch. It's either triggering on or off. There with a CCPA in the United States. So with Facebook, there's, I would say, a little bit of a wrinkle there, or other channels where they have their I think they're called the DPA. There's 3 properties in the pixel. So you can default to just send the default, like, hey, California, automatically restrict data collection. It's not blocking it entirely, so it does restrict some of that data. But again, it's nuanced on a channel by channel basis. But what you mentioned, if I understood the question correctly, that is something that Google offers in their data collection process. Maybe they're using it with part of their machine learning and the machine learning models that they're using in GA4 to try to make data whole.
Great. Thanks, Brad. We are soon about to wrap it up. So if you want to hear more about these topics, or if you need help with your analytics setup, just visit woolman.co. You can also listen to our weekly Commerce Insight podcast, and you can anytime reach out to me. Brad, thank you for your time. And how can people reach out to you if they have more questions?
Yeah, appreciate you having me, and thanks everyone for taking time out of your day today. You can either reach out to me on LinkedIn, Brad Redding. You can email me, brad@getelevar.com, and happy to help any way I can.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. Have a lovely afternoon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.